Alright guys, and welcome back to Armored Warfare, and today we're not looking at any gameplay. What is this? What is this video? Well, a lot of you recently, I usually recently very loosely, a lot of you guys have been asking me for a very long time, Izzy, can you make a weak spot guide? Can you show us how to penetrate tanks? Tier 9, so I was like, I can try. And here we have my feeble attempt at using MS Paint to try and help you guys. But this isn't a weak spot guide as such. This is more such my sort of where I would shoot on a vehicle and where I would not shoot. There are going to be some bits on the armor in that way. You can penetrate, you can shoot them, but I'm not going to shoot there just simply because I wouldn't. There's no point to it. This is where I'm pure. This is me. This is where I would shoot at this. So, okay. Front of a T90 MS, here we are. So the red symbolises where I would not shoot. I would not fire at the front of the turret because it's just a ricochet, and the front glacis is just like, you know, bounced off all the time. But the lower plate is a bit different. It's got like a metal band across the top of it, which makes it stronger. It can penetrate through the orange band. I have done it with other T90 MSs, etc. But that green band along the bottom, you can notice it when the T90 MS is in light. You can put a round straight through the very bottom of the hull, doing full damage to it. And it's a very, very vulnerable spot on this vehicle. That's why T90 MSs will always wiggle the hull side to side. That lower plate is quite weak to being shot. And also, if you saw my Challenger 2 versus 3 video, you'll see that when I'm dueling the T90 MS, I'm firing at that tiny little cupola on top. Only does about 100 to 200 damage, but it's better than shooting at the front turret, for instance, because that's just an auto ricochet. Moving on to our sidearm of the T90 MS, I've labelled the front of the turret there red, because that's basically still the front. It's the front, but it's more angled towards the side, is what I'm saying. So that's still very, very thick armour, but it's even more angled now. And with the era slapped on it, you're not going to penetrate that. So don't fire at the front of the turret from the side, or the forward end of the turret. Fire towards the rear. That's where the autoloader and ammunition is generally situated, which you really want to knock out on the T90 MS. It brings that rate of fire really like up high. It fires very slowly with that. And the hull, of course, is very weak. Now the side skirts at the front can be penetrated, but don't be surprised if you do ricochet around. I have done it a few times, yes. You do ricochet rounds off the side of that space to pleek armour. And the reason why I've also labelled the rear of the vehicle in a different shade of green is because firing into the engine of these tier 9 MBTs is critical at bringing down their mobility. Now everyone knows the tier 9 MBTs are very, very mobile vehicles, and trying to bring down that mobility to try and get them to be sluggish and slow, you can quickly knock them out then with, say, a Crab or a Draco or another tier 9 MBT if you've got a working engine. So the reason for that is just to bring down the mobility, and also because engines can give you critical shots. If you fire into the ventilation of the engine, so if you're firing down on top of the engine, or from the Abrams' case behind, as you'll see later, you can deal extra damage for them for critical hits. Moving on to the rear of the T90 MS, there you go. Basically, I don't know why I show you the rear, it's just easy to penetrate them, but some vehicles are a bit different than others. Rear of the engine, of course, is labelled differently because you want to shoot the engine as much as possible, and the rear of the turret is quite easy to penetrate. So, moving on to our next vehicle, the Leopard 2A6. Now, I do not want to engage these things from the front at all. I will stave off engaging these things from the front unless I really, really have to. Everywhere I fire, even at a T90 MS, everywhere I fire on the top rounds, it just bing, bounces straight off. I can't deal with these things from the front. You guys probably know some sort of secret or something, but I don't. This is what I would do. The yellow bit is, I've sometimes penetrated the driver's hatch. Very rarely. It can be done, but I don't recommend it. So I've labelled that as yellowy orange there. So you have the option to do it, but I don't recommend it because it's very hard to penetrate and very hard to hit because it's a very small weak spot. So the side, yep, there you go. Front of the turret again is a bit like the T90 MS. It's still got a lot of armour slapped on it at a different angle, so you don't want to be firing at the front. The rear of the turret, yeah, go for it. You'll penetrate that quite easily and do a lot of damage to the commander, the gunner, the ammo storage, you name it. Maybe even the APS if you want to shoot that, but that's pointless. You won't do any damage. Side of the hull, very weak as well. The Leopards have very, very weak side armour, and the engine, of course, is labelled in its different colour because shooting the engine is what we like. If I have a side shot on any vehicle, I will always aim into the engine deck. Just unless I've got a very quick snapshot I have to deal with, then I will just fire. But if I have an aimed up shot on someone that I can aim a shot, I will fire into the engine. It can cause fires, it can cause all sorts of mayhem if you get it right. And that's why on the rear as well, I've also labelled it just completely like fire into the engine. Rear of the turret, yeah, just if you want to, but the engine's more important. Abrams, here we go. The Abrams is another one of those Leopard 2A6s from the front, except this thing has a few more weak spots. So the front turret is just impenetrable, unless you're firing some sort of ATGM or whatnot, but the APS at the moment, pre-1.0.14, so they are pretty powerful against ATGMs. You don't want to be firing those. Kinetic rounds, yeah, you're not going to penetrate. The upper glacis of the Abrams is near impenetrable at that stupidly steep angle it has. Very, very well armoured machine from the front. The driver's hatch there. Now, the problem with the Abrams is it's a very low silhouette MBT, which is good and bad in its own little reasons. So it makes the silhouette smaller of the vehicle, but if you're fighting, say, a Challenger or a T90 MS or a little bit taller than you, they can aim down into the driver's hatch if you're face-hugging them, which, you know, full damage, driver knockouts, etc. on these vehicles. You don't really want that at all. So try and stave off from a face-to-face hug. But that's a nice weak spot there on the front if you're face-hugging. Don't aim for it if you're not face-hugging. You're never going to hit it, and you'll always bounce off if you do, if you're firing at medium to long range at this thing. The two weak spots that I would recommend is the Commander's cupola on top, which doesn't deal very much. It's like the T90 MS, really. It's damage, but it's not very much damage, that's the thing. And the weird little, I think it's a commander or a gunner's sight on the right-hand side of the turret. I've labelled that green because that can be penetrated. I've done that a few times in the past, which is quite useful, but I always go for the commander's hatch. And the weird, I don't know, is that, what scope is that? Oh, I don't know what scopes these are. And then there's the other orange thing by the 50 caliber Browning that you can penetrate if you have a very big gun and a very good penetration roll. Other than that, you're not going to penetrate it. It's a bit like the driver's hatch. Don't bother aiming for it if you're that close. Aim for the commander's cupola. A little bit of an easier shot. So, the side of the Abrams. Here we go. This is a little bit of a you know, look at that. So, front of the turret as well. Same as the rest of them. It's really well armoured. Don't bother for that. Now, the turret I've always found is a progressive sort of turret. I always fire at the rear of the turret if I have it, but the centre of the turret, where that yellow band is, for me, I don't normally penetrate there. It's not a red, because I do penetrate it, but at the same time, the turret, like my penetration indicator tells me, yeah, you got a 50-50 chance of penetrating, you can pull the trigger if you want, but, you know, you might not. So I've labelled that yellow, not orange, sorry, orange is a different thing, yellow, just because, you know, I want to warn you guys of my experiences. And the green, of course, the front drive wheel, easy to penetrate. Engine as well. The engine on the Abrams is, oh my god, this thing will just like, the amount of times I've seen these things burst into flames is hilarious. And the orange there represents the era on the side of the vehicle. This also comes in handy with the Challenger as well. So the era here, you can fire an AP round through it. Yeah, if you're firing at 90 degrees perpendicular to the armour, you'll most likely penetrate. But if you're firing a heat round, for instance, you probably will not penetrate at all. Or an ATGM through the side, whatever. You don't want to be firing a heat round or a HE round into the era because it will just do nothing, really. So I've labelled that orange because if you're firing kinetic energy rounds, you'll penetrate the era, but don't be surprised if you don't, because some era does actually give a multiplier to AP rounds. Heat rounds and, what's it, HE rounds, you don't really want to be shooting into. They're firing into the engine. If you're firing a heat round, you'll do so much more damage. And if you've got Ioannis as your commander with a heat round and all that crit, you'll just set him on fire, really. There's no other way around it. He'll just burn with that gas turbine. And the rear of the Abrams, of course. Here we go. You can see where I've marked up the engine with the different colour green. Now, those black bits, because I play on really crap texture quality, because my laptop sucks. Yes, I know. Take it out in the comment section. I play on a laptop, blah, 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 blah. Let's get on with it anyway. You can see the vents on the back. If you go and scour an Abrams, you can see those. They're on the Tier 7 one as well. Firing into those with any vehicle, even if it's an autoloader, will do substantial more damage. I think it's like a 25% or more damage increase for the crit hits, which is really helpful for knocking these things out. And it's a massive weakness to the Abrams if anything gets behind you, just because they can easily hit them. Every other vehicle seems to be on top of the engine deck. The Abrams is behind the engine. It's at the rear of the vehicle, which is a bit of a handicap when anyone gets behind you, say a crab with a 30mm, for instance, and the rear of the turret. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now, moving on to the Challenger 2. I love this vehicle. It's the best vehicle in the game. So, labelled here, completely red on the front. I've never seen anyone penetrate the front of a Challenger even with a T90 MS firing 80 GM rounds or kinetic energy, I've never seen these things be penetrated from the front. Now, before you go, oh, but you can penetrate the driver's hatch, yes, you can. You can penetrate the driver's hatch. I've labelled it orange, though, simply because if you're angling your T90 MS, if you're angling your Challenger 2, you can't penetrate it. If you use the lip of where the armour comes out, where it sort of bulges upwards and then round to meet the just under where the turret is, if you use that to your advantage, you can cover the driver's hatch quite easily. You just cover that and they can't penetrate that. The only thing that you can reliably penetrate from the front of a Challenger 2 is the commander's hatch on top, which is like the same for any vehicle really. But driver's hatch, if they're facing directly at you, go for it. Fire a T90 MS round straight through the front of that driver's hatch, I keep forgetting what I'm going to say, and you'll basically just do full damage to this thing. Bit of a weak spot, but it can be negated with a good bit of angling. Sides, here we go. The yellow I've marked up for the era because it's got era on the front half of the turret and as well on the majority of the side of the hull, which, you know, same story as the Abrams, Vlad can bounce heat rounds, can bounce HE rounds quite effectively, kinetic energy rounds can go through a perpendicular angle, blah 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 blah. Rear of the turret, green, yep, easily penetrate that. That's always a good thing to shoot at, but more or less you always want to be shooting at the engine of a Challenger because it's not the most mobile vehicle, so bringing down its mobility even further than it is sort of makes this thing more of a mobile bunker. It doesn't really move very quickly, and if you're firing into the front driver's hatch, you could have knocked this driver out. Heyo, Challenger 2 can't really move very quickly, which is what you want. And the rear of the Challenger 2, front turret, rear turret. Yep, okay. We've gone through this about 1,000 times now. So guys, thank you for having a look at my sort of guide thing. Tell me what you think. I'm not sure if it's very good at all because I sort of didn't really have enough time. Hopefully it's helped you out against some tier 9 vehicles. And as always guys, thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.